Dr. Ofrit Shapira-Berman is a psychoanalyst and a professor at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. She's been working very closely with the families of those missing and killed in Israel on October 7th. And we wanted to talk to her about how the returning hostages are doing, what's being done to help the families with this sort of reintroduction period, and about the healing process. So first of all, Ofrit, thank you so much for talking with us. Can you start by telling us your role during this whole ordeal since October 7th?
Yeah. Okay, so first of all, good evening, and thank you, Katie, for having me. I'm actually heading an organization that's called Frontline Med, FLM, and we are an organization made out of about 1,700 physicians and about 500 psychoanalysts. We actually existed before October 7th because we were, in a way, part of the protest before. But on October 7th, just about 2 hours after it all began, we actually immediately understood that we have to join all of our strengths in favor of what is going on. We had no idea where it's going to. But for the first hours, our physicians basically gave advice to people who were locked up in the shelters at the kibbutzim in the south. They were wounded and they needed some medical help. And then they helped to evacuate some of the wounded to the hospitals by phone to direct the forces. And on Saturday afternoon, I was asked to support a father whose son was missing at the south. He was a cyclist, he was a bicycle rider. And I think about on 7 o'clock when they called him, he answered the phone, but on 9 o'clock, there was already Hamas terrorists who were answering the phone in Arabic. So they, of course, understood that something was very wrong. And for 4 days, the father was looking for his son at the south, for his body or for whatever. And during that time, I was supporting the father of this young man and his young wife and his 2 children and his mother and his siblings. And 4 days into the ordeal, the father actually located the car, and some of his son's belongings, they were all stained with blood, and an officer that just passed by gave him some clues that helped the father understand that his son was actually murdered. But going back to Saturday, the experience with this father made us understand that one of the most important missions that we are going to have is going to just give support to the families of those murdered and of those who were taken hostages. On Sunday morning, I recruited about 5 of Israel's psychoanalytic institutes. We are a psychoanalytic empire here in Israel, so about 500 psychoanalysts joined the group, and ever since then, it's about 7.1 weeks. 7 weeks in 1 day. We are just getting requests from people from all over the country that need help, some of which are just cannot get help from the state. And we are just giving them a psychoanalyst to either support them or take them into therapy for as much time as they would need.
In other words, Ofrit, you're dealing with a lot of people who have been traumatized psychologically, and you're trying to really perform triage on so many people.
Yeah. So actually, perhaps we have about 9 million people who are traumatized, but of course, not all of them need help now. And some of them, even if they need help, they'll have to wait because we don't have the resources. So we are actually treating basically the people who've been directly affected by October 7th. And that means people who have been wounded, whose family has been slaughtered in front of their eyes. A lot of the families of the kidnapped people, we're actually, our organization is basically responsible for psychologically supporting many of the family of the hostages. Once they come back to Israel, in recent days, we had the biggest group coming back. I think about almost 40 hostages have been brought back home. Once they get back home, actually the state sort of takes responsibility, at least for the first few days, being taken into the hospital. So we actually have little information about how they're doing because it's all being kept very secretive. But we are treating the families before they come back, and it's a horrific ordeal. It's like, I just met yesterday, it was Saturday, but we are working like 7 days a week now. So I was meeting with a family of Naama Levi. She's 19 years old, and she was kidnapped. And she's a soldier, so she may have to wait for a while until she'll be back. And it's so painful for a family. It's like they're really heartbroken.
So I understand about 58 hostages, Ofrit, so far have been released, and you're not seeing them. So you can't really tell us what kind of condition they're in physically, but are you hearing about sort of how they're doing physically and emotionally, and how they were treated while they were held hostage?
Yeah. So I can tell you what is being published over the news and a little information that is not published in the news. What is published is that, first of all, most of the hostages who have been released, or all of them, or at least, well, most of them, besides 2 or 3, are actually mothers and children. These are the only ones that the Hamas has been willing to release. I think the first ones that were released, we were told that they're physically okay, not very good, but physically okay. Psychologically speaking, nobody is talking about it. It's, of course, nobody is allowed to talk about it. Yesterday, a young woman of 21 from the Nova Festival was released, and her condition is not that good. She was released even though she was not supposed to be released because her medical condition is not good. And she was taken to the nearest hospital. And they said her life is not in danger, but she's not good. And today they have released an 84-year-old woman, or yesterday, who is in a bad condition. Her medical condition is bad.
What are you hearing about the circumstances under which they were held?
So again, it's probably very secretive. I mean, there are very, very few details that are being released, and so they're actually covering all the possibilities. They're saying, okay, they were underground and on the ground. They were being moved away from one place to another. Some of them were held together, but not all of them. And over the last 2 weeks, they had the food decreased. So they didn't have much to eat, that they basically ate rice and some pita, and that's it. So they all lost weight. They are all quite weak. They are all being kept in the hospital, which means that they are not physically fit to be released home. But overall, these are not the wounded people. We do know that some of the hostages are wounded quite badly. They were shot. Some of them, of course, we have no idea whether they made it or not.
There was one young man whose arm was blown off by a grenade, I saw, but he has not been released.
No men are going to be, they're going to be the last to be released. Actually, the Hamas demanded, at least that's what they report, that all women who are younger than 54 will be considered to be soldiers or ex-soldiers, so they're not going to be released. And as far as we know, the Israeli government has insisted that 54 is not a soldier, and neither is 30 years old. Actually, women in Israel, we get released out of the army possibly at the age of 21, 22, and we usually don't serve at the army any day after that. Still, the deal that has been signed for now is only for mothers and children. So the only exception is a young woman who is 21, and she was released because her medical condition is not good, and a young man who I think is 22, and he has a Russian citizenship, and Putin made a demand that he will be released. Other than that, just children and mothers, and also not all the mothers of the children have been released. I mean, we have There are two girls who were released yesterday, one of which you interviewed her father, Emily's father, and her friend was released, but the mother who was with the two girls was not released. She has been kept behind. Nobody has any idea why. So, and they made sure for all the families who were taken hostage as a family, they kept at least one family member in captivity. So it's still very, very painful.
It must be very difficult for the families who still have their loved ones being held to see all these tearful reunions of other families. What has that been like for them, and how are you helping them?
For some of them, it's very, very, very painful because some of them, like one of the mothers, the mother of the young woman who was released yesterday, who is 21, her 18 years old son is still being kept as a hostage. So that must be very difficult. I spent a lot of hours yesterday on Saturday with the family of that 19 years old girl. They knew she was not going to be released. They're very, very scared concerning what they may be doing to her. She was actually, she's one of the most famous footages that was released over the first day. I think you're probably familiar with that too. She's the girl who wears some I don't know, some pajamas, and all of her pajamas are stained with blood. Nobody knows whether she was sitting on blood or whether she was in any way wounded.
Sexually assaulted.
Yeah, so it's very, so everyone is very, very scared about that, about the possibility that some of the young women or girls have been abused physically and sexually.
I saw that Emily Hand, Thomas Hand's daughter, who turned 9, I guess last Friday, right?
Yeah.
That she was released, and that was obviously an incredibly moving moment. But tell me some of the challenges someone like Emily will face, and her father, having dealt with this ordeal in terms of getting back to some semblance of normalcy.
Yeah. So I do think that the first few days, and perhaps even more than the first few days, will be probably very, very happy. It will take time, I think, before the trauma will start to surface, but it will eventually, and it won't take very long. These children have not only been taken hostages, they have witnessed the most horrible atrocities. For example, Emily and her friend, she had a sleepover at her friend's house, and her sort of stepmother was murdered. So once she gets back to Israel, they had to tell her that her mother was murdered. She was in captivity and probably had no idea what happened to her father. She's coming back, and there's no home to come back to because the kibbutz is all ruined, it's all burned and destroyed. Her biological mother, for example, has died when she was 2 years old, and now she has lost her second mother. All the community is completely traumatized. I mean, her kibbutz has lost more than 90 people were murdered, and almost 30 other people have been kidnapped. And it's a very small community. A kibbutz usually amounts to between, I don't know, the smallest kibbutz was 100 people. The largest kibbutz is about 1,200 people. Some of the communities have lost more than 25% of their members. They are all very connected. They grow up from the day they are born. So it's very, very difficult. The other children, some of them, and her friend, for example, her mother is a single mother, and she was left behind. So that young girl, she's only 14. I think she's going to celebrate 14 in a few days. She's coming back. She has no parents. This is also the case with quite a few of the other children who've been released, like the young Abigail, right?
Right. I interviewed Liz Naftali, who is Abigail's great aunt, and Abigail is 4 years old, correct, Ofrit?
Yeah.
She
Yeah.
has a 6-year-old sister and a 10-year-old brother, I believe,
Yeah.
and they're living with relatives. Her parents were both murdered, and she had to crawl out from under her father's body and ran to this other house. And
Right.
so were the people she was staying with, were they released also, Ofrit?
Yeah, today. Actually, she was picked up, I think, from her body, from her mother's body or something, and she was all covered with blood. And someone who was running out of the house to fight just picked her up and like threw her to the shelter of his own family, his wife and 3 children. And later on, they found out that all of them were kidnapped to Gaza. So Abigail was, she was returned today, or I think today, and also was the mother and the other 3 children. But Abigail is coming back to a family that doesn't exist anymore, at least in terms of parents. She's an orphan.
So she will have to get reunited with her siblings. And then I think relatives of her mother who are now caring for the children who were left behind. I wanted to ask you about the other young man I interviewed who was so nice, Michael Levy. Yes.
Yeah, Levy, yes.
His brother, Or, I believe,
Yeah.
was at the music festival. His wife, Or's wife, was murdered.
Not
He
all,
was-
no, sorry,
Yeah.
yes, you're, yeah.
Or's wife was murdered and he was taken hostage. And I'm curious if that has happened, has anything happened with that?
No, nothing. In the case, or again, because he's a young man, as sad as it sounds, he's probably going to be released the last. I also know, as far as I know, they have no information about his condition because the Red Cross has not been allowed to see any of the hostages. So actually, until the moment they meet a doctor, a physician here in Israel or at the Red Cross, nobody has any idea what the situation is. We do know that Or was at a sort of a shelter, an external shelter, in which everyone, there were about 29 people at that shelter stuck together, and only 4 came out alive. Everyone was murdered. And nobody actually saw a footage of Michael Levy's brother. We all hope that we believe that he has been kidnapped, and we are fighting very fiercely for him and for everyone to be released. But nobody knows what the situation is.
So there's a chance that, I mean, he's hoping and praying his brother was taken hostage, but there's also a chance that he died that day and his body simply hasn't been retrieved.
So I don't think that's the case with Or, because there are very few people that are
Unaccounted for.
Yeah, there are very few people, and as gross as it sounds, one of the reasons that it has taken so long to identify, a young girl was identified just about 2 weeks ago, and the reason it took so long is because she was burnt in a way that they had to bring archaeologists to dig, to just, to like dig in the dirt and find something, because nothing is left. But I don't think that's the case. I mean, they have seen 4 young men being taken away from that shelter, and we believe that O is one of them. And just think how horrible it is that people are hoping that their children are being held as hostages, because the alternative is so much worse. It's like, and I have no idea how they get up in the morning, really. It's just
People who follow me ask some questions, Ofrit, so I just thought I'd pass them along. Someone asked if it's appropriate for the reunion videos of the hostages and their families to be shared on social media. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, my personal opinion is that it's not a good idea. And actually, within our recommendations, we have recommended the families to take some time, not to be interviewed so quickly and not to post anything, because we know, or at least we are guessing, that they're overwhelmed, not just the people who are coming back, but also their family. And we think that it's too quick, but they are adults and they're citizens, and they can do whatever they want. And I think that it's also very much, it's because they feel very grateful to all the people who have been working so hard for their loved ones to be released. I also think that they feel guilty because, you know, they've actually formed a family for the last 7 weeks, all of the families of the hostages. And all of a sudden, you know, some people, like, they get their children back. And of course, they're very, very happy. They all promise to be back, just to take a few days off, and then they're going to be back with the others. But I'm quite sure that it's a mixture of feelings of gratefulness and guilt.
What are some of the challenges psychologically, Ofrit, as a psychoanalyst, will these families face because of the trauma they've endured? I guess it's highly individualized.
Yeah.
But can you tell us what some of the common threads will be among many of these people? And I imagine it also depends on their age, right?
Yeah. And I have no idea whether it's going to be easier for the children, at least those who've been held with their mothers and fathers, or for the older people. You know, it's let me start by saying that nobody really has a clue. I mean, people who say that they know what's going to happen are probably not really therapists, because not only that in therapy you never know what's going to happen, but actually the Western world has no experience with so many women and children who have been held as hostages for such a long time. I mean, we do have experience from Nigeria and from the Yazidis women, but again, not that they suffer any less, but it's just that mental health is no issue there. I'm sorry to say that. I mean, I don't know if anybody cares about how they feel. I have been treating people who've been sexually abused as children, who have experienced other kind of traumas, and very often it takes years and years of therapy for them to live a full life. I mean, to function is relatively easy. People function, they get up in the morning, they go to work. But in terms of being able to have a full mental life, or to be happy, to be able to love other people, to feel secure, to trust other people, it's probably going to take a generation or two. I mean, we are still treating people who are labeled as third generation to Holocaust survivors. So it's not the same, but I expect that we are going to have to treat the children of those people as well.
Well, trauma can affect actually someone's DNA, right? I mean, they're learning so much more about the physiological, biological impact of trauma on your very being. So perhaps learning about that will be helpful to professionals like you. Someone else asked to Ofrit if Stockholm syndrome is to be expected. Why don't you explain what that is? I think most people know, but just in case.
So it's a syndrome that has at least two names. One is like an identification with the aggressor. What we know by now is that people who've been held as hostages, and that is also true for children who've been abused by their parents or by another adult, they don't only hate the abuser, they're also, because they're very dependent on the abuser, they get attached to him. It's not that they love the abuser, but they get very strongly attached to him. And the realization that the same person who is responsible for who can kill you is also the person who is responsible, who can be merciful, that's a very, very complex mental realization. I will be surprised if the people who come out of Gaza will be attached to their to the Hamas terrorists. I'm actually more concerned about the opposite possibility, that people will be much more afraid and anxious, and that could easily lead to being hateful towards Arabs. I'm more concerned with that, actually.
Someone also asked if these individuals will have access to long-term mental health care, both in Israel and for the prisoners who have been released to Gaza.
So yes, so I have no doubt that the people who were held in captivity will get the best that Israel can offer. Again, I have to say that I personally am more concerned with people who have survived the massacre, because these people who have just survived the massacre are not, at the moment, they are not entitled to long-term therapy, and I see that as very problematic. Our organization is actually, we are trying to, we are giving those people long-term therapy, but we are only 500. And let's say that until October 7th, it was impossible for us to find an hour for anyone. We were all fully booked. Now we are finding hours, but we are limited.
Do you think some therapists from other countries may come to Israel to assist? Has that happened already?
Personally, I've received a lot of requests, and it's really heartwarming. I think it's wonderful that people want to come. I'm not sure that it's possible de facto, because you need to speak the language. You need to understand the culture. I keep saying that sometimes it's not easy for someone who lives in Tel Aviv to treat someone who lives in a kibbutz. I mean, these are different cultures, let alone for someone who comes from New York or from anywhere else. And also, of course, there's the issue of the license and the insurance. So I think it's a bit problematic. But it's so kind of people to offer the help. I mean, it's beautiful.
And finally, someone asked, and I'm curious about this too, what kind of PTSD treatment might be used? Because I know there's been a lot of progress in treating PTSD. And so what will be, again, it's highly individualized, but is there some kind of specific protocol that therapists now use to help someone who has gone through so much trauma?
So I'll begin by saying that I'm traditional, by the mean sense that I'm a psychoanalyst and I'm familiar with the new methods, and I'm qualified as an EMDR therapist and all the rest. But I actually put my trust on long-term therapy. I don't really believe in magics, but I do think that the new so-called they're not so new, but the new methods can be very helpful in terms of reducing anxiety and helping people with the flashbacks, with the more, I have to say, with the more simple symptoms of PTSD. I think the most difficult symptoms of trauma are relational, in terms of being able to trust other people and being able to trust yourself, to not in terms of being able to love again. But specifically in being able to trust other people. And for that, I don't think there's any magic, just long-term therapy, day after day or week after week, and just in a way to renew or reestablish their trust in people.
I worry about people who have focused so much singularly on getting hostages home and haven't had time to grieve the people who have died. And so they have a lot of healing to do. You know, I'm thinking of Abigail's parents, and her family focused so much on getting Abigail home. It's probably given them, a reason to get up and keep going. And now they have to deal with the deaths of her parents. And I'm sure there are other families like that too, Ofrit.
Yeah, so it's really very common. For example, the family of the young hostage that I'm supporting, they live, I think, in almost a complete dissociation. I mean, on the one hand, they know that something terrible has happened, and it seems like there isn't an inch in their body that doesn't hurt. I mean, it's really horrible. On the other side of their mental state, they have to get up in the morning and fight and fight and fight, and to absolutely believe that Nama is getting back home soon. And I have been with them for the last 4 or 5 weeks, and I can see how their mental state is in a way, they're getting more and more, they're getting sadder, they're getting more depressed. There are moments of feeling hopeless. I mean, they're just now beginning to imagine that maybe it will take longer than they thought. And that goes also for the families. I'm treating a 19-year-old boy who has lost his whole family. Two parents, both his parents and two of his siblings were murdered while he was on the phone, and he has heard everything, the screams and then the quietness. And it has taken him about, I think he's only now beginning very, very slightly to I don't know if it's even realization, to realize that his parents didn't go just for a long journey. And he's very intelligent. It's not that he thinks that they're
How old is he?
19.
19.
And 19. That's it. There's no one left. And I don't think that he has even begun to grieve. It's, after the funeral, he said to me, people came over at the cemetery, and they told me that I have to go to therapy because I need to digest what has happened. And he's very, very smart. So he said to me, he almost cried out, and he said, I don't want to digest what happened. I don't want to realize what has happened. I want it to be I want to push it away. I don't want to believe that it has happened. I don't want to grieve. And I understand what he's saying, and I can see how he's getting more and more and more depressed. Not clinically depressed, but humanly depressed.
Well, lots of healing is going to need to happen for some of these families, but the joy of being reunited with a child or a sister or a brother or a mom is reason for some kind of celebration, because the alternative would have been more unimaginable pain. But it's going to be a long road. They're lucky to have people like you helping them, Ofrit.
I'm lucky. I feel lucky that they allow me to do that. I feel very blessed. I'm not taking that for granted. I think it's so difficult for them to have all these new people enter their life. So I'm very grateful. They're very, very courageous people, and profoundly, profoundly sad and terrified. And right. I do want to say, Katie, I do want to thank you for what you're doing. I mean, the one thing that I think there are two things that scare them the most. One is that they're not going to get their loved one back. And the other thing is that the world is going to just let go of this issue and not care anymore. And I think the possibility that their loved ones are going to stay behind in the darkness, in the cold, and no one is going to care about them, that's like stabbing them again. So whatever you can do to keep it in people's mind is like, makes you almost an angel.
Well, I thank you, Ofrit, and let's stay in touch so we can, keep up on all of this.
I would love to.
Okay, well, go get some sleep. It's late there. You must be exhausted.
I'm fine. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Ofrit.
You're welcome.
Talk to you soon. Bye.